Here's one thing you should know about me. I am a sex nerd. And when I was recently reminded of this mathematical concept, I couldn't help but notice how perfectly it applies to sex. And I bet you have never considered before how the golden ratio could be applied to your sex life. And I am here to help you out with that. Let's get nerdy. In case you aren't already aware, the golden ratio is a natural proportion. It's found in art, nature, design, even the human body. And it is approximately 1.618, or we could reconceptualize it as 61.8%. If I'm being honest, I don't totally get the ins and outs of the golden ratio. I am decent at math, but this is far beyond what I'm going to do in a YouTube video. What matters and what's going to help you in the bedroom is understanding that things designed or timed by this ratio are naturally pleasing to us. This ratio just feels right. We see it in succulents, we see it on the Mona Lisa, we see it in art, it feels good to us. The golden ratio creates a sense of beauty and harmony, and it makes our brains feel a deep sense of satisfaction. All three things that we really want to have in our sex life. So today in this video, I'm going to share how the golden ratio works in sex and exactly how to apply it. And if you are a sex nerd like me, take a moment and subscribe to my channel, because if you like this, you are going to love the rest of what I've got going on over here. Before we do the how, we've got to talk about the why. Number one, why the golden ratio works so well. It is all about natural rhythm. The golden ratio reflects a natural flow that we as humans enjoy. When it comes to sex, understanding how to consider and apply this flow makes the experience feel more organic, more beautiful, and more satisfying for everyone involved. Number two, it keeps us from rushing. One of the things I think that is the most important to share about the golden ratio is when you should be reaching climax in relation to foreplay and aftercare. How do you structure a perfect sex session such that climax exists in the exact right ratio to foreplay, to like the building up end of the action, so to speak? Because knowing approximately how to time things out in sex is important. It keeps you from rushing through things, which is one of the most common complaints that women have of men. And it's also worth mentioning that this will also prevent you from lingering too long on any one thing, such that it can start to feel boring. A lot of people come to me and they're like, Caitlin, I don't want the framework, just tell me the answer. And this is an example of that. All right, number three, it creates psychological harmony. As I mentioned before, the golden ratio taps into something inherently harmonious and pleasing in our brains. When you follow this ratio in the bedroom, both of your partner are going to leave the experience feeling like it was complete and balanced. And that's because the golden ratio mirrors the natural rhythms that we're drawn to on an intuitive level. In other words, this just feels right. So let's get to the good stuff. How do you use the golden ratio to make sure that every partner in every situation you come across is deeply satisfied and experiences deep erotic harmony? You can think about the golden ratio as sort of similar to a good story. There are certain things in the story that we need in order to get set up for the action of the story to successfully move forward. If we take too long setting things up, we're gonna get bored. If we rush past it, we're gonna be left wanting more, but like not in a fun way. As things progress in a story, these rules of timing apply all the way up until the very end. You wanna make sure there isn't too much fluff in the middle, but you also wanna provide enough detail. You don't want the end to feel rushed, but you also don't wanna make it so long that things get boring and the audience can't wait for it to be over. To apply this to sex, think about how, just like a story, we can divide sex up into sections. For the purpose of this video, we're going to use an hour total from start to finish because math will be easier that way, but you can scale this up or down based on the amount of time that you have. And that's probably coolest things about ratios, right? Anyway, okay, let's get to the sex math. The first part of your sex session should focus on building connection and anticipation. You can call this the light foreplay part, and it is part of the emotional and energetic setup. According to the golden ratio, if your sex is going to last for an hour, this should be about the first 20 to 25 minutes. You want to take this time to gradually explore each other's bodies, working up from kissing to touching to some slightly more involved foreplay. You're giving stimulation, but mostly right now you're just building anticipation. And this is the part that a lot of men tend to rush through. Now, I hate saying this because it sounds awful, but it is true. Women's bodies are more similar to ovens than microwaves, and it does take them a while, it takes us a while to be warmed up. There should be no penetration during this time. At most, maybe like a finger finding its way into her vagina. But really, this is all about taking the time to wake up and appreciate every part of her body so that when you do get to the area between her legs, you are also resisting the urge to do anything too intense or too fast. This is like the introduction of the story. We're meeting the characters. We're getting the plot in place. Section 2, the middle. At around the 20 to 25 minute mark, you are officially entering the middle of the experience. And this is when the intensity should start to increase. If you've taken your time in the warm-up, you'll both be fully engaged and engorged, and you'll find that she's naturally beginning to tune up to the next gear of intensity. The desire that you've built by creating all of that anticipation is starting to boil over, and things are heating up naturally. If you're touching each other, it's becoming more intense. And this is the ideal time to move on to penetrative sex if that is on the menu. Now, the middle should take you all the way through around minute 37 to 40, and that's out of the 60 minutes total. And just like any great story, the intensity continues to build as you begin to approach climax, which happens to be our section 3. Before we dive into this section, it is important that we define climax. Once in a while, it happens that two people come at the exact same time with the same intensity, and that is amazing, but it is not the norm, and that is totally okay. So when I say climax here, I mean the most intense part of the experience. She might have already had an orgasm. You might have already had an orgasm. Maybe neither of you has had an orgasm yet. Maybe both of you or neither of you has an orgasm during this moment. I'm not necessarily referring exclusively to orgasm. For the purposes of this video, climax means when things are the most intense for both of you. This is when you are lost in the experience. This is when you are pounding. This is when you are, maybe if it was a kink scene, this is when you are like spanking her the hardest or whatever it is. You have built up to this moment. It has been a natural progression, and this is the height. This is the climax of the story that you have built together. According to the golden ratio, the climax of a sexual experience should happen past the halfway point at about 61.8% of your way through the experience, which would be about minute 40 out of 60 in an hour. By this time, you've built enough anticipation and connection that the peak of intensity feels organic and satisfying, rather rushed or abrupt. And of course, science backs this up because most women take between 20 and 40 minutes to get to orgasm. And the longer that you build up an orgasm, the more powerful that it becomes. Math and science and art and sex. Beautiful when they all come together. And of course, if you have any concerns on making it there and timing it perfectly, just check out all of my other content on how to please a woman in bed, increase your confidence and your competence that you can time all of this and make it happen and last long enough for it to all happen. I've got a full suite of YouTube videos and online courses that can help you no matter what it is that you are experiencing that you think might get in the way. Let's jump into the last part of our story here, what happens after climax. And this is actually in many ways the most important part of any great story or sexual experience, and that is section 4, resolution. After we reach a peak of intensity in the bedroom, it is important to leave an adequate amount of time for you both to gradually come down from the experience. If you've been keeping track of the timing, which I don't necessarily fully recommend, like don't put a clock over your headboard, you've probably noticed by now that the golden ratio leaves the last 20 out of 60 minutes to this section. That's a pretty significant chunk of time. And it should be, because this is when we engage in aftercare, which is an incredibly important part of any sexual experience. This is when you transition into the comfort and the intimacy of doing things like holding each other, talking, snuggling, kissing, and just doing nurturing, connecting activities. Taking your time with this builds intimacy and closeness in your relationship. The last thing that you want to do after sex is rush away. Taking time for aftercare creates an extended afterglow that can last longer than the sex itself did. For many of us, this is what makes you an exceptional lover instead of a just plain good lover. This is what separates you from other lovers that she's had before. So you do not want to skip this. Remember, although the golden ratio is a mathematical principle that can absolutely be applied to sex, you don't need to be following it exactly to the minute. Maybe she's ready to have a second or third or fourth orgasm. Maybe all of those happen during what we'd consider the climax section, or maybe the first 3 orgasms are kind of mild and they build up to a huge one and that's the climax, or maybe she has the big climax but then there's a bigger climax after that. All good. It's not an exact science after all. I mean, it is not for the purposes of this video. I recommend that rather than keep exact track of the minutes, you just keep the golden ratio in mind and you make sure that you're giving every aspect of the sexual experience the time and attention it deserves. So in the simplest terms, golden ratio dictates that the first 60% of the sexual experience is about connection, emotional closeness, creating anticipation, working up in terms of intensity, and getting to a point of a heightened peak. The second 40% of the experience moves down from the most intense moment gradually and ends the experience in such a way that keeps you connected. Remember that it is how something ends that typically dictates how we are going to remember it. You can keep touching each other, you can keep going for orgasm, but spend that time intentionally. And if there's one thing to remember, just think about having that climax of intensity at around 62% of the experience, and try it out and let me know in the comments. This is kind of a wild thought that I had recently, and I really want to know your thoughts on this. Do you find that this is how sex naturally happens to you? Did you learn something in this video that you're going to be changing up and experimenting with the next time that you're with your partner? While you're down there leaving a comment, don't forget to subscribe so that you can get all of my content on all things sex and relationships. I post new videos every single week and I don't want you to miss out. I will see you here next time. Bye.